I'm John Swanson. I'm one of the chaplains at Parkview Regional Medical Center, and I'm here with Dr. Dave Johnson, one of my friends and an EAP counselor. And we're talking today about prayer and meditation, two topics that lots of people want to know about because we wrestle with how do I slow down enough to meditate? How do I pray effectively and learn how to pray in powerful ways? My question for you is, so what does prayer look like?
Well, I would say on the prayer side, it's very personal. I'm not a good public prayer, and I teach people to meditate. And meditation in the secular world has kind of been teased apart from the spiritual world. But for me personally, I've had to kind of unpack what does that really mean? Because many of the programs around meditation, or mindfulness-based meditation at least, is about awarenessing. What do I see? What do I hear? What do I touch? What do I taste? What do I smell? Being present to what is, using the sensory system. And so for me, John, the contemplative or the prayer part of it is God doing God work in that space of presence. And I don't always name that for other people. I definitely go with people where they are in their prayer life. And so for me personally, the mindfulness or the meditation becomes the vehicle to be present to God and to listen to God. That soft, tender presence of oneness and healing, to be transformed. You know, for me to then maybe have the courage to move forward to do the things that I need to do in life.
I think that it moves us to actually an overlap between what we think of as prayer and what we think of as meditation. Because lots of times we think about meditation as an emptying. And we think about prayer as a filling empty space with our words of beseeching and requesting. When a better way to think about prayer perhaps is to think about conversation. So I think that often I deal with that same kind of concern you do on the other side. Meditation must be this, prayer must be this. And somewhere in the middle is what both of those end up being.
You know, there are folks that come to the mindfulness-based courses. Some folks don't have a belief in God. Some folks have very different beliefs. In my Christian upbringing, I make no judgment. I let God do what God does in those spaces. But sometimes it's not intuitive for the healthcare provider, and I find it helpful for me as a nurse and a therapist to say, do you come out of a spiritual tradition? What is that tradition? Do you pray? What does that prayer sound like or look like? And have that person teach me. And it's a way for me to get out there and into their belief system and to validate. You know, when we think about helping people with the magnitude of change and pain and suffering that takes place in our lives, there are times when I think people can be anchors, obviously, but I think God's a pretty good anchor for many folks. And being able to have a person language that, and for me to then be privy as a healthcare provider to listen on to what that means for them.
One of the things that I've done a little bit of study about is an idea of spiritual temperaments, about how we may have different ways, different people have different ways in which we most feel connected to God. And so for some people, they feel most connected to God or something outside of us when they're in nature. Some people feel most connected to God or something outside of us when they're in a large crowd. Everybody's looking at the stage, everybody's cheering, engaged, that kind of. Some people feel more connected when they're doing caregiving. Some people feel more connected when they're taking action somehow. And so it's possible that what works for one person in that both calming and that feeling connected may be different than somebody else. And I think that often we take these labels, prayer, meditation, and we say, it has to fit these rules. It has to fit this framework or it doesn't count. But if, in fact, we actually are all different, it's possible it's going to look different for different of us. So as you think about the purpose of prayer, the purpose of meditation, how do you answer that? What's the purpose?
I think perhaps it means different things to different people. Meditation, the purpose for me is grounding, to get me out of my thinking and overthinking and worried head, to help me to be present to my wife, to my kids, to my grandkids, to the beautiful world, to my patients, to life. So the practice of meditation is what grounds me to be present, and it opens the window to being with God.
The purpose of prayer is to acknowledge being in the presence of somebody bigger than we are, and to just be honest about ourselves, about what we want, about life. And in that honesty, I think that God's able to work on us and with us and through us.
I think the older I've gotten, John, the more I believe that we separate kind of artificially mind, body, and spirit. You know, that somehow that the body has illness and injury, and then somehow the psychological system and mental health system is completely operates differently. And yet, I think the older I get, the more I realize that everything's interconnected, including that spiritual life.
Thanks, Dave. It's delightful conversing with you. I think that probably we ought to talk again and talk a little bit about hope, because I think we're working around the edges of that.
Let's do that soon. Thanks, John.